I thought we should have a look at what the American media is telling the American people about the infrastructure bill. I've got 3 clips, one from Fox, CNBC, and one from CNN. Each of them are interviewing a different person, starting with the Fox one. So let's jump straight into it.
Joining me now, former acting White House Chief of Staff and former Office of Management and Budget Director, Mick Mulvaney. Good morning to you, sir. Good to see you.
Jackie, thanks very much for having me this morning.
First off, I'd just like to get your reaction to this. Obviously, it is a huge spending package coming after the coronavirus relief package, which addressed so many things, including a small portion of the coronavirus itself. Your thoughts on what the package kind of should look like here? I mean, there are a lot of folks saying we don't need this much spending.
Sure, there's a couple different things. First of all, I don't think people grasp exactly how much $2 trillion is. I think the specific proposal is 2.3, and every time we do that, it sounds like it's a small change from 2 trillion to 2.3 trillion. That's $300 billion. The overall budget, Jackie, of the United States government, the budget that we wrote every single year at the Office of Management and Budget, was about $1.3 trillion. So this bill by itself, which may get a couple of weeks worth of debate, will spend almost twice as much as the entire federal government does in a single. And it's got bits and pieces in it that are just mind-blowing. I think there's $400 billion for care for the elderly. Great, wonderful, let's have that debate, but that's not infrastructure. I think it's got $200 billion for affordable housing. Great, wonderful discussion. Not infrastructure. Keep in mind, the entire budget of housing and urban development, an entire agency of the federal government, is only $50 billion a year. That's the entire agency, and this one bill proposes to spend 4 times that on a single line item in HUD's regular budget. So
Maybe if there was more than $50 billion spent on it each year, you wouldn't need to spend 4 times the amount on it in one go. Just my theory there with, tossing the numbers around. Let's carry on.
Numbers are just huge, bizarrely huge. It makes you wonder if it's really a serious bill or if it's just designed to make political points.
All right, first things first, I'm glad Mick Mulvaney highlighted how much $1 trillion is, because that is important for this, and how he goes on about if you wouldn't classify housing and development as infrastructure, what would you classify it as? What would that fall under? Let's carry on.
Well, it sounds like they're pretty serious about it, and whether or not they have bipartisan support, they may use the technique of reconciliation to go ahead and pass this through. And you bring up the point here that it's not only focused on infrastructure, so many things are wrapped up inside this, and we should be having those conversations, yet the administration and the Democrats don't want to. They don't want the dialogue.
Yeah, I think the best evidence of the fact that it's not really an infrastructure bill is that the Democrats are talking about reconciliation, because both parties have been trying to pass a reconciliation bill now for, infrastructure bill now for several years. It got bogged down during the Trump administration over the Democrats' refusal to reduce the environmental regulations and the delays in getting roads and bridges built. But the simple fact now that the Democrats are talking about reconciliation means they know they're not going to get any Republican support, especially in the Senate. Why is that? Because it's not an infrastructure bill. If it was a regular infrastructure bill, it could pass by itself. Reconciliation, one of those really boring inside the Beltway type of discussions about how to pass something in the Senate with only 50 votes. Traditionally, we would never be able to do that more than twice a year. Democrats are now talking about using it again and again and again to pass their agenda.
Yeah, and you've even got some moderate Democrats out there who aren't necessarily supporting a plan that is quite so expansive at this point, with the kind of numbers that we're talking about here. And President Biden ran on sort of this moderate platform. At least that's what he made people think. And now he is sort of feeling this pressure and this heat from the extremists, the left extremists in the party. And that's what this bill, to me, seems like an example of.
It is. I think it's one of the messages that isn't getting out. Your network is doing a decent job on it, but most of the media is burying the fact that the Democrats really are not interested at all in bipartisanship, not interested in working with Republicans.
Get a load of this guy. He says that if it was just an infrastructure bill, they could get it passed without reconciliation, and also says that they've been trying to pass an infrastructure bill for years now. Then why didn't it pass, bro? By your logic, it's because it wasn't an infrastructure bill. So it kind of seems like the only way you're going to get an infrastructure bill through is with reconciliation. And how he also goes to say that the evidence for it not being an infrastructure bill is because the Democrats are going to try and pass it with reconciliation. This is just an outsider's perspective, right? This is just if this was the first I heard of it and I had this guy explaining it to me, this is where I would end up as a result. Moving on to the CNBC clip.
You know, of the $2.3 trillion so-called infrastructure bill that he laid out yesterday, less than 6% of the spending in that bill actually goes towards roads and bridges, less than 6%. But then less than 5% is actually going to rural broadband. So it's very similar like the prior Biden bailout bill, where less than 9% went to shots and crushing the virus. Less than 6% is going to roads and bridges. Republicans would be happy to have an infrastructure bill that actually went towards roads and bridges, but that's not what happens here. We are, in my opinion, really entering an uncharted territory here with this level of spending. If you look at just the $2 trillion the president proposed yesterday, that will be 4 times what the country spent to build the entire interstate highway system. That I think should concern anyone.
Alright, this Jason Smith guy doesn't know if he's coming or going. He starts off with complaining that only 6% or whatever is going on roads and bridges, like they're the only things that are infrastructure. And then he goes on to say that this bill is like 4 times the amount that was spent on making the interstate highway system, which was back in the 50s, back when America's population was half of what it is now. So he's complaining that you're spending too much, but not enough on roads. You want more of it spent on roads? What do you want, bro?
What's most concerning to you? What's it's being spent on, or how it's being paid for, or both?
I think it's all of the above, because the fact that we're proposing $2.3 trillion of spending here, and that's 4 times the amount what we spent under today's dollars for the entire interstate highway system, yet only 6% of that entire $2.3 trillion, like I said, is being spent for roads and bridges. That's scary. If you take the proposed plans with the prior $6 trillion that's already been spent in the last year, that's more spending than the total combined wages of all American workers. That's a huge problem. And then
how this Jason guy says that this 2.3 trillion plus the other 6 trillion already spent over the last year, that's more than all Americans' wages. You mean the Americans that don't even have a $15 minimum wage? So it's more than what all of them are being paid. Well, in that case, it still probably isn't enough. Can't really be that much.
You go into the tax front. The taxes that are proposed is the largest tax increases in the history of the United States. And if you look at how the taxes will work, you talk about what country will benefit, countries like China and other countries like that, because it will increase our business rate to be higher than that of communist China. And I think that's an extreme problem.
Funny how the biggest increase in taxes in the United States history still doesn't bring the rate up to what it was before Trump's tax cuts. Interesting that it was brought down from 35 to 21 and they want to bring it up to 28. Oh gosh. And just that sentence of, oh, we will have a higher business rate than communist China. So that's their way of saying it's a bad thing. All I heard from that is, oh, communist China has a business/corporate tax rate. What are they doing having businesses there and corporations? I thought they were communist China.
Congressman Smith, the figures that you're citing are kind of hard to get your head around. The idea that they spent, this is going to be 5 times as much as what was spent to build the interstate highway system. I mean, that was back in the 50s, 70 years ago. Is that based on inflation-related comparisons, or is that just straight up what they spent versus what we're proposing to spend now?
No, it's based, and it's 4 times, not 5, but it's 4 times the amount of what would be the today's value of building the interstate highway system with inflation and everything. So that tells you how disturbing it is.
So all this guy's argument essentially is it pays for too many things and it costs a whole lot more than if it were to pay for that one thing.
Wow.
Congressman, there's a lot of green stuff, and you know the Journal has its own take on things. That this is Senator Warren and Senator Sanders' fingerprints all over this, or at least a big wish list of what's in this, which is something that probably is not you can argue about that, but at least that's the point that's being made. Part of the green initiatives, which I think is interesting, is the Journal says they want that the president wants to force feed green energy on the electric grid. And that's all fine and good, and the transition is all fine and good, but it's going to take a lot of new high voltage capacity power lines to transport solar energy one way and wind energy back the other way. And we can't get out of the first few pages of regulatory issues with environmentalists about even doing this. So the act of actually trying to transition to green energy is going to probably be very difficult, given that it's going to take a lot of infrastructure that is going to be blocked by the same environmental groups that would supposedly embrace it.
Oh, so it was on Bernie that this bill turned out to be more green than not. Good on Bernie. I really thought after the way that election went down he wouldn't have much pulling power, but if you're going to say it was him, then shout out to Bernie. And now as for they want it to be green, but the infrastructure, the environmentalists will probably end up getting in the way of the things that they asked for. What that reminded me of was something Mulvaney said in the last clip. Let's go have a look at it again.
Infrastructure bill now for several years. It got bogged down during the Trump administration over the Democrats' refusal to reduce the environmental regulations and the delays in getting roads and bridges built.
See what I mean? It kind of seems like because the Democrats were against Trump's infrastructure bill because of the disregard of environmental regulations, and the host of that show seems like he's saying that the same people will do the same thing for building infrastructure for solar and wind. Okay, mate. Okay. Sure.
It will be very difficult, but this is supposed to be an infrastructure package about roads and bridges. That's what Republicans and Democrats, I think, could work together on in a bipartisan way to actually make sure that we rebuild our nation's highways and make sure we address our locks and dams. That's extremely important. If you want to talk about energy, I think it's less than 10% of all of our dams actually generate power. Why don't we do that? That would be a very safe, clean way to generate power that can help in a lot of instances. But that's not what this bill does. And I think that if Republicans and Democrats got together, we could work on that.
This guy, nah, it's meant to be just about roads and bridges. But if you want to talk about dams, I could talk about dams. Yeah, dams seem like they would be a really useful piece of infrastructure. And that's a good segue into the next clip from CNN, which has the Energy Secretary being interviewed.
Joining us now to discuss the proposal, Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm. Madam Secretary, thanks so much for joining us, and happy Easter morning to you. This bill includes a lot that is not traditionally considered infrastructure. There's $400 billion for in-home care for elderly Americans and Americans with disabilities, another $213 billion for affordable housing. It spends more on electric vehicles than on roads and bridges. Now, you know that Republicans are going to have concerns about all of this. If President Biden wants to make this bipartisan, why not focus this bill on what everyone can support? Roads, bridges, airports, rural broadband.
Now let me tell you a quick thing about roads and bridges. You know who uses your roads and bridges an awful lot? Delivery services like Amazon. Do you know who doesn't pay very much tax? Amazon. So yes, in building roads and bridges, you are in another way subsidizing some of the richest people in your country, in the world. Go figure, no one's going to mention that on these news shows though, are they?
Well, it is focused on all of those things. I mean, Republicans and Democrats historically have wanted to see infrastructure spending on broadband, which this bill includes, wanted to see infrastructure spending on water and removing lead from water systems, which this bill includes.
This bill improves your pipes, your water pipes. It will get the lead out of the water. Well, I'm sold. I'm convinced. That's all you need to tell me, because I'm a firm believer in people should have clean drinking water. And if you're going to go around saying you're the #1 country in the world, I would expect that of you, the clean drinking water thing. So yeah, if anyone isn't for this bill, I'm just going to take it as they're not for clean drinking water. That's a real bad state to be in, guys.
But this is the American Jobs Act, so it's also focused on creating good-paying, sustainable jobs in a whole array of sectors that will help us to win the future. It's the biggest investment in America since FDR, since the New Deal. And especially, I mean, I look at this from as being a former governor of a manufacturing state, Jake, the investments in the supply chain for manufacturing. You know that for decades now, we have watched our manufacturing jobs leave. We're at a 70-year low. This bill says we're going to make stuff in America. We're going to make the means to our own energy security. I mean, it is an amazing statement that finally we're going to invest in America instead of watching all of these other countries beat us to the punch.
Right, but in terms of priorities, I mean, more on electric vehicles than on roads and bridges?
All right, I'm going to dunk on Jake Tapper and simultaneously kind of agree with him with the whole, but more on electric vehicles than roads and bridges. It's like, well, yes, Jake, what do you expect to drive on the roads and bridges? And now why I kind of agree with him is that skepticism about how much is going towards it, because I will make a short video and upload it after this one about why I'm very cautious about anything to do with Elon Musk. We'll leave it at that and we'll continue with this one.
The need to make sure that we have an electrified transportation system to reduce climate change is highly supported and very necessary. And so
that's the first time anyone said climate change out of all three of these clips. Like, I did trim some of them down a bit, and I promise I didn't trim anyone else saying climate change out of their interview. I'm glad the energy secretary at least mentioned it. But with that said, it really did seem like the conversation was being pushed to that topic by how often Tapper wanted to bring up the electric car thing.
what does that mean? I mean, it means that we have to build the batteries for those electric vehicles. It gets back to manufacturing. Part of that investment is making sure that we can build the batteries in the U.S. for electrifying transportation and for energy storage instead of getting those batteries from our economic competitors. You know, China has had came out with their most recent 5-year plan, and they have a plan to corner the market on the supply chain for batteries. Okay, we can just sit there and watch that happen,
right.
Or we can decide, no, we want to build that stuff here, and that's part of the investment in the electric vehicle infrastructure.
Surely there comes a point when you've fed enough of this American media and their talking points, and you gotta stop and ask and go, hang on, how is quote unquote communist China kicking everyone's ass at this capitalism thing? Something doesn't add up, or my understanding of what something must mean is incorrect, or what they're telling me is incorrect. Surely that realization happens to people after so much of this stuff, right?
I guess my question is, the coronavirus relief package passed the House and Senate with 0 Republican votes. Ultimately, looking at this bill, I'm wondering if that would be okay with you and President Biden again, to have a bill pass with 0 Republican votes?
Well, obviously the preference is to have this done in a bipartisan way. 80% of America supports investing, over 80% investing in infrastructure. That's Democrats and Republicans and independents. So the president is very concertedly reaching out to Republicans to say, come to the table. If you don't like a component of it, tell us how you would do it. What do you want to see in this bill? But honestly, Jake, the vast majority of this bill includes things that Republicans are supporting, like roads and bridges spending, like broadband, like water, like manufacturing supply chains. These are all things that Republicans have actually introduced bills on. So come to the table. We want to make it bipartisan.
Yet the administration and the Democrats don't want to. They don't want the dialogue.
I just wanted to highlight that you have, as expected, Republicans and Fox News saying the Democrats don't even want us to be in the discussion with them. And then you have an actual Democrat in the administration come out and say, we want you at the table with us talking about this bill. And then you also have Joe Biden's record of working with Republicans.
ultimately, if that doesn't happen, he is elected to do the job, to win the future for America, to invest in our people. And we hope that Republicans can join their constituents across the country in supporting this effort.
Ultimately, if you don't get Republican support, you're willing to pass this with using reconciliation rules, meaning only 50 Democratic votes in the Senate and Vice President Harris casting the tie-breaking vote. You're willing to do that?
Well, as he has said, he was sent to the presidency to do a job for America. And if the vast majority of Americans, Democrats and Republicans across the country, support spending on our country and not allowing us to lose the race globally, then he's going to do that. However, his sincere preference, his open hand, is to Republicans to come to the table and say, if you don't like this, how would you pay for it? If you don't like this, what would you include?
I think it's less than 10% of all of our dams actually generate power. Why don't we do that? That would be a very safe, clean way to generate power.
See what I did there? I made it like they were serious people for a moment, that they gave a shit about what they were talking about. Wasn't that fun? And like I said, we're going to look at the American media and the way they're talking about the infrastructure bill to the American people. Not so much the infrastructure bill. If that's what you're after, probably the wrong video to come to. Because my opinion on that is spend what you need on what you need, my guys. Get on it. My only concern is a handout to Elon Musk, which I'll get to in another video. And I'll also make another short video with some recommendations, suggestions for something that America should look into that's related to infrastructure at least. And the final point I want to touch on is spending. What they think is too much spending. Something that would be in the same field as infrastructure. Something that you could also get contracts for, you know? So I thought we would add the last 20 odd years of the US military spending. So from 2019 to 2000, and to save time, I'll round down, and because this is billions of dollars, when I round down, we're only shaving off a matter of hundreds of millions. And what do you get for all these trillions of dollars? You get some war machines, I guess, military bases. That's some sort of infrastructure, just not in America usually. Missiles, you know, to drop on other countries' infrastructure and stuff. And yeah, sometimes Lockheed Martin makes a plane you can actually use. But other than that, what do you really have to show for all of this military spending? Imagine if you spent close to $12 trillion at home on your people, on your infrastructure for the last 20 years. Imagine how amazing everything would be. And yeah, that's just the final point I want to make about this, that they'll complain about spending that will ultimately result in something that benefits the people, and you'll have something to show for your spending. But they never seem to have that sort of tune when they're talking about what has amounted to $125 billion shy of 12 trillion spent on what they try to call a war, but in reality is an invasion that happened that long ago, that people born in the year it happened are now old enough to go fight in that quote-unquote war. And I'll wrap this up here. Thank you for watching. You made it to the end. I'm proud of you. Send this to an American.